The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing a client's balance sheet when it slid through the mail slot at 9:14 in the morning. I can see the timestamp on the security camera footage I pulled later. Inside was a certified letter from the law offices of Whitmore and Crane, attorneys at law, stating that I was the named primary beneficiary of the estate of Harold Eugene Calloway. My grandfather, who had died 6 weeks earlier at a funeral I was not told about until it was over. 21,400,018. That number, that is the number my parents decided was worth more than I was. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New. The channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that silence is not the same thing as surrender. If you've ever watched someone smile at you while moving your name off a document, this story is for you. Drop a comment, subscribe, and let me tell you what happened. My name is irrelevant. What matters is what I do for a living. Because in this story, my profession was not incidental. It was the entire mechanism of justice. I am an estate planning attorney. I have been for 11 years. I draft wills. I structure trusts. I sit across conference tables from people who are trying to protect what they built from the people they love and the people who love them only conditionally. I read documents the way other people read faces. I know what a will says. I know what it means. And I know with clinical precision the 17 ways a family can attempt to contest, circumvent, or quietly erase one. My grandfather Harold built his money the old way. 40 years in commercial real estate in the mid-Atlantic. A man who shook hands on deals and then went home and read the contract twice before signing. He was not warm in the way that photographs looked warm. He was warm in the way that a man who shows up is warm. He came to my law school graduation. He sent cards on my birthday, not text cards with handwritten notes that were always exactly 3 sentences. He asked questions and then actually waited for the answers. I was the only grandchild who called him back. My parents, my mother particularly, had a specific way of managing Harold. Attentive during the years his health declined, helpful in ways that were visible. When Harold moved from his house into a senior living facility in 2019, it was my mother who coordinated the move, who selected the facility, who installed herself as the primary emergency contact. My father drove the truck. They took photographs of themselves helping him. Those photographs lived on my mother's Facebook page with captions like "Family First Always." Harold called me the week after he moved in. He told me the facility was fine, but that the room smelled like someone else's life. I drove 3 hours to bring him his chess set and a lamp from his study. We played 2 games. He won both. I did not tell my parents I had been there. That was the arithmetic the family ran on. My parents performing care in public, me providing it in private, and Harold watching both and saying nothing. I did not understand then what he had been calculating. My grandfather died on a Sunday morning in March of last year. He was 81. I learned about it on a Wednesday from a neighbor of his old house who saw the obituary in the local paper and thought I should know. The obituary listed his survivors. My parents were named. I was not. I want to be precise about what I did and did not do in that moment. I did not call my parents. I did pull up the obituary on my laptop and screenshot it at 6:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in March. I printed it. I put it in a folder. The funeral had been held the previous Saturday for days before I found out he had died. There had been a reception. There had been flowers. There had been, I learned later from that same neighbor, a guest book, a cream-colored guest book with a blue ribbon that Harold's housekeeper of 15 years, a woman named Dolores, had brought because she thought it was what you did. My name was not in that guest book. Because I was not there. I was not there because no one told me my grandfather had died. I put the screenshot in the folder. I put the obituary in the folder. I labeled the folder with the date and Harold's full name and I set it on my desk. Then I sat very still for a long time. My hands were flat on my desk. I noticed that the letter from Whitmore and Crane came 6 weeks later. I called the number. I spoke to a junior associate who verified my identity and told me that senior partner Daniel Whitmore would like to meet with me at my earliest convenience to discuss the estate of Harold Eugene Calloway, of which I was the primary beneficiary. I did not let my voice change. I said, "Thursday works." "Thank you." I drove to that meeting on a Thursday morning in May. I wore the gray suit I wear to closings. I brought a notepad. I did not bring a folder. Not yet. Daniel Whitmore was in his late 60s. A man who had clearly been in rooms like this one for decades with a quality of stillness I recognized as professional courtesy extended to someone he expected to find devastated. He had a box on the corner of his desk. He had a will flagged with color-coded tabs. He had a trust instrument that was 47 pages long. Harold had retained Whitmore and Crane in 2018, 3 years before my parents moved him into that facility. He had drafted the will. He had established the trust. He had in 2021 amended both. The amendment was dated April 4, 2021. I have that date memorized. April 4, 2021 was 11 days after my mother installed herself as Harold's emergency contact at the facility. 11 days after she had taken those photographs, Harold had gone to see Daniel Whitmore in person on April 4, 2021 and revised his estate documents. The primary trust beneficiary, me, 100% of liquid assets and investment accounts totaling $17.2 million. The real property distributed through a separate instrument. The commercial portfolio appraised at $4.1 million to me with a specific carve-out for a parcel of land in Virginia that Harold had held since 1987, which he left to Dolores, his housekeeper, because as the will stated in his own words, she showed up when it mattered and asked for nothing. My parents were listed in the will. Harold had left them each $25,000 and a note. The note was in the box on the corner of Daniel Whitmore's desk. Daniel slid the box across the table. Inside was a sealed envelope, a chest piece, the black queen from the set I had brought to his room, and a photograph of the two of us at my law school graduation. On the back of the photograph in Harold's handwriting, she reads the fine print. Always has. I turned the photograph face down on the table. I did not open the note. Not yet. I asked Daniel to start from the beginning and tell me everything. He told me my parents had contacted the facility in February of 2021 and begun the process of having Harold's decision-making capacity formally assessed, citing concerns about cognitive decline. The assessment had found Harold entirely competent. My parents had then attempted to arrange a meeting with Harold's previous estate attorney, not Whitmore, to discuss updating his documents. Harold, who had apparently been watching this unfold with his particular brand of quiet attention, had instead placed a call to Daniel Whitmore and transferred his legal representation. He had then, and this is the part one read 3 times, he had then instructed Daniel to document the timeline, every contact from my parents, every inquiry, every attempt to access his financial records that came through the facility's administrative office. Daniel had a file. The file was 4 in thick. I asked for a copy of everything. Daniel said he had anticipated that. I sat in that office until the afternoon. I read the 47-page trust instrument. I read the amendment. I read the 4 inches file. The second revelation came on page 31 of that file. A letter Harold had written himself, notarized, describing in plain language what he believed was happening, what he had observed, and why he had made the choices he made. He wrote it the way he played chess. No wasted moves. The letter ended with one sentence. I will return to that sentence. I drove home. I put everything in a new folder, organized by date. I read it all again from the beginning. Then I made dinner. I put a record on. I did not call anyone. My parents called me 2 weeks after the meeting with Daniel Whitmore. My mother called on a Saturday morning with a particular tone she uses when she is delivering news she expects will require management. She told me in a voice that was almost gentle that they had been working with the probate court and that things were a little complicated with Grandpa Harold's estate. She said they wanted to have a family dinner. She said there was a lot to sort through and it would be better to do it together. I said that sounded fine and asked what time. At dinner, my father sat at the head of the table and spoke about Harold's estate as if he were the executive. He used the phrase what Harold would have wanted for times. My mother talked about the family home, a property Harold had sold in 2015, so that was simply not a thing that existed, and about keeping it in the family. My younger brother, who had flown in from Charlotte, talked about investment strategies for the portfolio. None of them had seen the will. None of them knew what was in it. They were building a structure around an assumption. I listened. I ate my food. I asked no questions. After dinner, my mother walked me to my car and told me with the careful warmth of someone selecting their words that she hoped I understood that Harold had needed a lot of support in his final years and that the family, meaning herself and my father, had carried that. She said she hoped I wasn't going to be difficult. I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Who called the facility in February of 2021 to have his competency assessed?" She said she didn't know what I was talking about. I said, "Good night." I sat in my car in their driveway for 3 minutes. I called Daniel Whitmore's office and left a message for him to begin the notification process. Send the letters. If you've ever watched someone call themselves a caretaker while keeping another person's name off the funeral guest list, you already know what kind of letter gets sent next. Stay with me. This is where it gets very, very quiet. 3 weeks after the letters went out, my parents called a family meeting, not a dinner this time, a meeting. In the living room of their house with my brother present and my mother's sister, my aunt Renatata, who had flown in from Florida, and Renata's husband Gerald, who had opinions about things he didn't understand, and the confidence to voice them loudly. They called it a family meeting. I understood it as something else. I brought a folder. My mother had arranged chairs in a circle, which I thought was a significant choice. She opened by saying that the family needed to present a unified position. She talked about what Harold would have wanted. My father spoke about the legal costs of a prolonged dispute being bad for everyone. Gerald said the word contested several times as if he had just learned it. My brother, to his credit, was quiet. He looked at his phone. He looked at the floor. My mother then explained in a tone that had shifted into something harder and more direct, that Harold's estate had clearly been structured under undue influence. Her phrase, the legally operative phrase, and that they intended to demonstrate that I had manipulated an elderly man with cognitive decline. She said this while looking directly at me. The room waited for me to respond. I said, "May I have the floor for a moment?" She gestured as if granting a favor. I opened the folder. I placed Daniel Whitmore's engagement letter on the coffee table. I said, "Harold retained independent legal counsel in 2018, 3 years before any of what you're describing." I placed the amendment dated April 4, 2021 on the table. I said he amended his documents 11 days after you arranged to become his emergency contact at the facility. I placed the competency assessment on the table. The one my parents had commissioned, the one that had come back finding Harold entirely competent. I let my mother read the letterhead. She had ordered that document. It was her own evidence. Gerald said something about lawyers being manipulated. I put the 4 inches file of documented contact attempts on the table. I didn't say anything. I let the volume of it sit there. My mother's voice went up. She said I had always been Harold's favorite and that favoritism was not the same as intent and that a jury would see through this. My father stood up. He used a word he has never used with me before, and I want to be precise. I wrote it down later in my notes with a timestamp because I knew that moment would matter. I said very quietly, "Sit down, please." He sat down. I took a single page out of the folder. Harold's letter, the one he had written himself and had notarized. I read one line from it. I have watched my daughter-in-law manage my care the way a person manages a property they intend to sell, not with love, but with a plan. I am not confused about the difference. The room was very quiet. Renata put her hand over her mouth. I placed that page on top of the stack. I looked at my brother. He was looking at the table. He said without raising his head, "I didn't know about the funeral." His voice was flat and honest. I noted it. I picked up the black chess queen from my jacket pocket, the one from Harold's box, and I set it on top of the stack of documents on the coffee table. I said, "He always played black." He said, "Black had to be smarter because black goes second." I put on my coat. I said, "I'll see you in probate court." I walked out. The contest was filed. It was dismissed. Probate court reviewed the timeline, the competency assessment commissioned by my own parents, the 4 inches documentation file Daniel Whitmore had built on Harold's specific instruction, and the notarized letter. The contest was dismissed without a hearing. 12 words in the dismissal order. Testator's capacity and intent are not subject to reasonable dispute. The trust dispersed in full. $17.2 million less taxes and legal fees. The commercial property portfolio transferred. The Virginia parcel went to Dolores, who called me and whose voice on the phone was the only time in this entire story I had to put my hand over my mouth for a moment before speaking. My parents received their $25,000 each. They received their notes. I do not know what Harold's note to them said. That was between Harold and them. My brother called me 8 weeks after the meeting. He said he needed to tell me something. He said he had known about the plan, not the legal mechanism, but the general intent to manage the estate situation, and that he had gone along with it by staying quiet. He said he was sorry. He said it without qualifiers. I told him I heard him. I told him I was not ready to have a longer conversation, but that I had heard what he said. That was honest. I left it there. Renata never called. Gerald never called. My parents filed a second challenge 6 months later through a different attorney. It was dismissed in 48 days. The black chess queen sits on my desk at work between my computer and my lamp. I look at it when I'm in a client meeting and someone across the table is explaining to me why a document doesn't mean what it clearly says. It is a useful thing to look at in those moments. The money went through legal channels and then through mine. I established a scholarship in Harold's name at the university where he earned his degree, the Harold E. Callaway Scholarship in Business and Ethics, awarded annually to a first-generation student. The first recipient was named last spring. I sent Dolores a photograph of the announcement. She sent me back a card, handwritten, 3 sentences. I donated a portion to the legal clinic at my law school, the one that provides estate planning services to elderly clients without resources. Because Harold's situation had taught me something specific about what happens when a person without a lawyer meets a family with a plan. The rest I invested carefully in writing with witnesses. I want to tell you what I did not do in this story. I did not fight because I was angry. I do not think anger is a particularly useful tool. I fought because a man I loved had taken 11 careful years to build a legal structure that said, "I see what is happening and I am choosing something different." He had trusted that the structure would hold and that there would be someone on the other end of it who knew how to hold it with him. Calm is not the same thing as weak. My family had confused the two my entire life. They mistook my quietness for compliance. They mistook my absence from their performances of care for indifference. They saw someone who didn't argue and assumed someone who would not act. Harold never confused those things. He read the fine print. He knew I read it too. What they tried to take was not the money. The money was the mechanism. What they tried to take was the last clear statement of a man who had been watching and weighing and deciding for 81 years and who had chosen deliberately legally with witnesses to say this one. This one showed up. I was not going to let that statement be erased. Not by grief. Not by pressure. Not by a dinner table full of people who decided the guest book didn't need my name in it. The document said what it said. I made sure it said it where it could be heard. If this reminded you that the person who never makes a scene is not the person to underestimate, keep that. If it reminded you that showing up quietly and consistently is a thing that gets noticed, even when you think it isn't, keep that, too. Harold kept receipts. He just called them wills. If you want more stories about quiet people and the documents they leave behind, subscribe to Family Revenge Stories New. Drop a comment below. I read them. And if you know someone who needs to hear that calm is a strategy, not a surrender, send this to them. I'll see you in the next.